Greetings, dear viewer. Welcome to Cheating Expose, a channel dedicated to those who value traditional family principles and reject infidelity. If you resonate with these values, make sure to subscribe. Now, let's dive into today's story. For 20 years, Jenny and Mark built a life together. Their marriage a blend of love, routine, and a recent adjustment to an empty home as their son and daughter pursued their studies at college. They found themselves with plenty of time alone, yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. Jenny seemed distant, her restlessness obvious, and she often avoided eye contact during their conversations. The unease began to trouble Mark more and more, especially after he saw Jenny having lunch with a man he didn't recognize. Someone strikingly attractive and clearly not just a colleague. While the interaction appeared innocent enough, her reaction when he asked about it disturbed him. She denied being there, insisting he must have mistaken her for someone else. Mark, certain of what he'd seen, found her denial unsettling. If it had been a casual meeting with a client or co-worker, why lie about it? The secrecy weighed heavily on him. One evening after dinner, they settled into the living room. While Jenny cleared the table, Mark prepared their coffee. The quiet was filled with polite small talk, but Mark couldn't hold back any longer. The tension was unbearable. "Jenny," he began carefully, "you've seemed so distracted lately. Is something going on?" Jenny's shoulders slumped as she set her cup down, avoiding his gaze. After a long silence, she took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you, Mark," she said, her voice shaky. "Before we met, there was someone else in my life. His name was John. We went to college together. We weren't close, didn't even like each other much. But there was something about him I couldn't explain, a kind of pull I felt toward him." She paused, uncertainty in her voice. "Twice, we almost crossed the line into something more, but each time something stopped us. We never had a physical relationship. But those moments left me wondering, as if there was something unfinished between us. After graduation, we lost contact. Then I met you, and John became a distant memory. I fell in love with you, Mark, completely. I never thought about him again until recently." Mark's heart sank as she continued, her voice trembling. "John started working at my company a few weeks ago, and when I saw him in the lunchroom, it completely threw me off. I can't explain it. I don't even like him as a person, but I feel this undeniable pull toward him again." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've been trying to avoid him, but it's been difficult. I've been distracted, distant, and I know it's affected us. Mark, I love you. That hasn't changed. But this feeling is consuming me, and I don't know how to deal with it." Jenny's voice faltered as she confessed, "I think the only way to resolve this is to face it. I need to have a brief affair with John. I'm certain it's the only way to get past these feelings and focus on us again. It's purely physical, Mark. It doesn't diminish how much I love you." Mark stared at her, his mind racing to process what she had just said. Jenny's face was flushed, her eyes a mix of hope and fear as she waited for him to respond. The air between them felt heavy, the silence deafening. Mark's anger simmered just beneath the surface, but he forced himself to stay calm. After counting to 10 in his head, he finally spoke. "Jenny, what you've just said is staggering. I can't give you an answer right now," he said, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "If I'm hearing you correctly, you've already made this decision without consulting me or considering how I might feel. That leaves me with two choices: to refuse outright and say this is unacceptable, or to agree and try to ignore the pain it would cause me." His voice grew firmer as he continued. "How can you believe this will help us? How does this solve anything?" Jenny's voice quivered as she replied, "Mark, I just need closure. Once it's over, I can fully commit to you again without any distractions. Can't you see that?" Mark shook his head slowly. "Not now, Jenny. I need time to think about this. I love you deeply. I always envision us growing old together, cherishing the memories we built. But this," he paused, struggling to find the right words. "Let's sleep on it. I'll stay in the guest room tonight, and we'll talk tomorrow evening after dinner. Until then, I don't want to discuss it further." His tone grew firmer. "And tomorrow at work, you'll avoid John. If he approaches you, make an excuse. Let him know you're too busy. This isn't a suggestion, Jenny. It's what I need." Mark sighed deeply. "I understand," he said. Jenny nodded, her face filled with a mix of resignation and unease. Mark gave her a brief, perfunctory hug before retreating to the guest room. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, and disbelief. Alone in the dark, Jenny lay awake, her thoughts racing. Had she made the right choice by being honest with Mark? Would it have been better to keep everything to herself? No, she decided. A hidden betrayal would have broken them if Mark ever found out. But the look in his eyes, the mix of pain, anger, and betrayal, haunted her. She wondered if their marriage could survive this. Only time would tell. Jenny had chosen to hide the truth about her lunch with John, though she suspected Mark had already figured it out. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. She hoped that Mark might come to terms with everything tomorrow, but a fear lingered that he might forbid her from seeing John again. What would she do in that case? Could she honor his wishes, or would she risk defying him? These unsettling thoughts followed her into a restless, uneasy sleep. Meanwhile, Mark lay awake in bed, his thoughts in turmoil. At first, he had assumed he, too, was struggling to process Jenny's revelation. He felt cornered, searching for a solution that wouldn't leave either of them with regret. Agreeing to her request felt like a blow to his pride, a step that would leave him vulnerable to ridicule and self-blame. The idea seemed unbearable, gnawing at his sense of self. On the other hand, refusing might force Jenny to choose John completely or, worse, ignore his wishes entirely, causing their marriage to unravel. The thought of losing her was unbearable. They had invested so much in their relationship, but conceding to something that made him feel diminished was equally painful. Even if Jenny complied with his refusal, a lingering sense of unfulfilled desires could cast a shadow over their lives together. It felt like an unsolvable dilemma where no option seemed bearable. Maybe suggesting a long getaway could help rekindle their bond and allow Jenny to let go of her feelings for John. He considered countless scenarios, only to discard them as flawed. Finally, as if struck by inspiration, a plan began to form in his mind. He decided to let the idea settle overnight, rolling over and allowing exhaustion to take over. He resolved to revisit his thoughts in the morning and give the matter his full attention. That evening, Mark came home to find Jenny in the kitchen, preparing a meal much more elaborate than her usual weekday fare. He recognized it as her way of expressing her continued care. The food was exquisite, but their conversation was stiff and strained. Jenny's unease was palpable, and an air of tension hung over them. After dinner, they moved to the living room with their coffee cups. Mark cleared his throat, signaling that he had something important to say. "I imagine you're waiting for my response to what you told me last night," he began. Jenny nodded but didn't speak. "This has been one of the most difficult decisions I've ever faced," he continued. "After careful thought, I've decided to grant your request to pursue a relationship with John." Jenny's face lit up with relief, and she instinctively moved toward him, but he raised a hand to stop her. "There are conditions," he said firmly. "I understand your desire to explore this, and I'm willing to allow it. But during our marriage, I've had my own opportunities, women who made their interest in me very clear. I resisted because I value our commitment. However, I've often wondered what it might have been like. Would it have been better, worse, or simply different?" He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "You may see John, but it must be discreet. He is not to enter our home, and you are not to discuss him with me. During this time, I'll move to the guest room while you remain in the master bedroom. Whether this lasts weeks or even 2 months, we will not share a bed or engage in intimacy." Mark paused again, observing her reaction before continuing. "When you're ready to end your relationship with John, you'll ask me to return to the master bedroom. That will show that it's over. But Once I've moved back in, you'll take my place in the guest room for twice the duration I spent there. During that time, you'll remain faithful to me, refraining from seeing any men outside of our usual social circles. Meanwhile, I'll have the freedom to see other women if I choose. Like you, I won't bring anyone into our home or share any details with you. As Mark spoke, Jenny's expression shifted from confusion to sorrow. A single tear traced a path down her cheek before she could respond. Mark interjected, "Take 24 hours to think this over. Make sure you fully understand what it means before you make a decision." Jenny sat quietly, absorbing his words. The relief she initially felt was now replaced with painful realization. She had never considered how unfair such an arrangement might be. The thought of Mark with another woman struck her deeply, and a wave of guilt washed over her. Memories of their shared history and love surfaced, and her perspective began to shift. The thought of Mark in someone else's arms unsettled her, making her question whether this path was truly worth the price it could demand from their marriage. What have I done? How can I fix this? Bewilderment and hopelessness overtook her. The brief moments Mark had used to lay out his conditions now seemed to stretch on forever. Fragments of their shared past flashed through her mind, and for a fleeting instant, John disappeared from her thoughts, like morning mist dissolving under the hot sun. Turning to Mark, Jenny spoke with unflinching resolve. "I don't need more time to think this over. My decision is already made. I accept your terms." Mark was taken aback by her decisiveness. He had braced himself for reluctance, but her immediate agreement caught him completely off guard. He had no real desire to pursue anyone else, but he had hoped his proposition would deter her from continuing with John. He had clearly underestimated her feelings for John, which were far deeper than he had ever suspected. As Jenny's words continued, Mark felt as if he were hearing them from behind a thick, muffling fog. "Mark, are you listening?" Her voice finally broke through the haze. "Yes, Jenny, I heard you. You've agreed to my conditions." "That's right," Jenny confirmed. "But there's more. I've asked you to return to the master bedroom tonight. I'll move my things to the guest room right away, but I'll only stay there for 2 nights. Mark, I love you. I've been selfish, and I deserve whatever this brings. I'll endure the pain of the next 48 hours, just as I've caused you pain. But please, come back to our bedroom tonight." Mark studied her for a moment, his face betraying no emotion. Finally, he offered a faint smile. "If that's what you want, Jenny, I'll move back tonight. But just so you know, I've been mentally listing all the beautiful women I could pursue in the coming weeks. You've given me only a single day and night to act, which significantly narrows my options. That's fine, though. But don't expect me for dinner tomorrow. I'll be late." Part of him wanted Jenny to stay in the master bedroom and retract her offer, but another part couldn't resist, making her feel a fraction of the pain she had caused him. Sparing her wasn't an option, and he intended to make her understand the weight of her choices. A year and 2 days later, Mark emerged from the basement, holding a bottle of Dom Perignon 1993, which he had saved for a special moment. Curious, Jenny asked why he had brought it out. "It's been a year since you moved back into the master bedroom," he said with a smile. Jenny kissed him softly, complimenting his wisdom and compassion in handling their struggles. Pouring 2 glasses, Mark said, "Jenny, a year ago, I came home wearing Chanel No. 5, a scent you disliked. You also noticed the lipstick mark on my collar, one that wasn't your shade. Didn't you?" "Yes," she admitted, "but I chose not to mention it. We had an agreement, after all. I didn't like it. In fact, I hated it," he continued. "But I accepted it because I knew I had earned it. Even then, I loved you. I still do. I was a fool." "I love you too, Mark," Jenny replied. "And even though we agreed not to revisit that night," Mark said, "I need to tell you something. Do you remember Philip Carter, one of my clients who visits annually? He's in town again, and joining us for dinner tomorrow with his wife Sharon. Last year, they arrived the same day you shared your revelation with me. That night, I went out alone, It was a pleasant evening, but before heading home, I asked Sharon for a favor. I asked her to spray me with her perfume, touch up her lipstick, and kiss my collar. Jenny's expression shifted as she processed his words. Before she could speak, Mark continued, I wanted you to think I'd been with someone else to hurt you, just as I had been hurt when I learned about John. But now, it no longer matters. I'm sorry for what I did. It was petty and unnecessary. Please forgive me. Taking her hands in his, Mark added, We're human. We make mistakes. People who don't either lack empathy or live like saints. I don't want a saint, Jenny. I want someone full of love and passion. But I need you to promise me one thing. Never hurt me like that again. Tears welled in Jenny's eyes as she clasped his hands tightly. Without a word, she guided him to their bedroom. There, she undressed him tenderly, her movements filled with care and sincerity. She knelt before him, her gaze locked onto his, radiating love and regret. Slowly, she reached for him, her touch gentle and deliberate. Mark pulled her to her feet, embracing her fully. Their kiss deepened, and their bond was reaffirmed in silence. In that moment, they both understood that their love was resilient and enduring, capable of carrying them through the years to come. As for John, his life fell apart. His wife, Susan, divorced him, and he lost his job due to an inappropriate relationship with a co-worker. Stripped of his social standing, which had been tied to Susan's career, he was forced to move away. Likely, he now spends his days chasing fleeting distractions in some obscure town, a mere shadow of the man he once was. This concludes the story. If you liked it, please give it a powerful like and subscribe to the channel.